My husband expects me to cook for his friends' weekly dinners after he chose a boys' trip over my mother's funeral. My husband Nathan skipped my mother's funeral for a fishing trip with his college buddies. Mom died after 8 months of cancer. I'd been her caretaker the whole time while working full-time as a physical therapist. Nathan complained every day about my being gone in the evenings to help her. When she passed, the funeral was on a Saturday. Nathan had planned a fishing trip that same weekend months earlier. I begged him to cancel. He said the guys were counting on him, and death wasn't convenient for anyone. He went fishing while I buried my mother alone. That was 3 years ago. It broke something in me that never healed. But I didn't leave. I threw myself into my career instead. Started taking specialized certifications, opened my own practice, hired 4 other therapists. We're booked solid 3 months out. I bought the building we operate from. Last year, I cleared $300,000 after expenses. Nathan works at a sporting goods store, makes $35,000 a year. Still acts like he's the king of the house because he's the man. I pay for everything. Mortgage, cars, insurance, groceries. He spends his paychecks on golf clubs and beer. But here's what changed everything. I stopped cooking. After Mom died, I just couldn't stand in the kitchen making Nathan dinner while remembering how he left me to grieve alone. So I started working late, eating at the office. He complained at first, but then discovered takeout. Problem solved, right? Wrong. Nathan started having his friends over every Friday. 4 guys from college. They order pizza, watch sports, drink beer in my living room. I stay in my office or go to my friend Rachel's house. I no longer care what he does. Then last month, Nathan announced he wants to make Friday nights more special. He wants home-cooked meals for him and the guys. Restaurant prices are crazy, he says. It would be nice to have real food. He actually stood there and told me I should cook for 5 grown men every Friday. I laughed. Told him absolutely not. He got this look on his face like I'd slapped him. Said I was his wife. That cooking was part of marriage. That his friends' wives all cook for them. That I was embarrassing him by not being hospitable. Every day since then has been harassment. Texts about menu ideas, links to recipes, comments about how his friend's wife made amazing ribs last weekend, how another friend's wife does themed dinner nights. Yesterday morning, he sent me a grocery list. An actual list. For ingredients for beef Wellington, homemade pasta, and tiramisu. For tonight. For his friends. Said he already told them I'd be cooking something special. I didn't respond. Instead, I called Rachel and asked if she wanted to grab dinner at that new steakhouse downtown. She said yes immediately. Then I called my colleague Robert and asked if he could meet me at my house at 5 p.m. with his truck. Didn't tell him why. Just said I needed help moving something. He agreed. At 4 p.m., I went home and started packing. Not everything. Just my kitchen stuff. Every pot, pan, plate, bowl, utensil, appliance. Even the spices. Loaded it all into boxes. Robert showed up and helped me carry everything to his truck. We drove it to my office and stacked it all in our break room. By 5:45, the kitchen was bare except for the built-in appliances. At 6 p.m., Nathan texted asking where I was. The guys would be there at 7. I texted back that I was at dinner with Rachel. He called immediately, screaming about how I was sabotaging him, ruining his friendships, and being vindictive. I hung up. At 7:30, he texted that his friends were there and there was nothing to cook with. Not even a knife to cut the pizza they'd have to order. Again. At 8, Rachel and I were eating dessert when Nathan called again. This time I answered. He was on speaker with his friends. They wanted to know why I was being so difficult. Why can't I just make one dinner? I set down my fork. Let me make this clear. Nathan chose a fishing trip over my mother's funeral. He left me to bury her alone because his fun was more important than my grief. Now he wants me to cook elaborate meals for him and his friends every week, like some kind of servant. After he couldn't even stand by me on the worst day of my life. The line went quiet. Then I heard Nathan's friend Paul say, "Dude, you skipped her mom's funeral?" Another voice said, "For fishing?" Nathan hung up. I heard shuffling and low voices through the phone before the call ended. Rachel reached across the table and squeezed my hand. We finished our dessert in silence. I paid the check and drove home around 9:30. Nathan's truck sat in the driveway next to 2 other cars. His friends hadn't left yet. I parked on the street and sat in my car for a few minutes, watching the house. The living room lights were on. I could see shadows moving behind the curtains. Then the front door opened and 3 guys walked out. They didn't say goodbye loud enough for me to hear. Just got in their cars and drove away. One of them was definitely Paul based on his red jacket. The other 2 I couldn't identify in the dark. Nathan stood in the doorway watching them leave. He had his phone pressed to his ear. His free hand kept running through his hair. That thing he does when he's stressed. I waited until he went back inside before getting out of my car. I could hear him through the door before I even got my keys out. He was yelling at someone. I unlocked the door and stepped inside. Nathan was pacing in the living room, phone still pressed to his ear. He saw me and his face went red. He said something I couldn't hear into the phone and hung up. Then he came at me fast. Not physically threatening, but his whole body was tense. He started yelling about how I embarrassed him in front of his friends, how I made him look like a monster, how it was just bad timing 3 years ago, and I was making it sound like he did something terrible on purpose. I set my purse down on the entry table. I didn't raise my voice. I told him there was nothing to apologize for because I stated facts. He exploded. Said I was holding a grudge over something he couldn't change now. That I was being cruel and vindictive. That his friends thought he was a terrible person because of me. I asked him if maybe he was a terrible person for leaving me alone at my mother's funeral. He stared at me like I'd hit him. Then he grabbed his pillow from our bed and went to the guest room. Slammed the door so hard a picture frame fell off the hallway wall. I picked up the frame. The glass had cracked. It was our wedding photo. I left it on the hall table and went to bed. Nathan was gone when I woke up the next morning. No note, no text. Just gone. I got ready for work and drove to my practice. The whole drive I felt strange. Not guilty exactly, just lighter somehow. Like I'd been carrying something heavy for 3 years and finally set it down. Andre noticed during our morning staff meeting. He asked if I was okay after everyone else left the conference room. I told him the whole story. The kitchen removal, the dinner with Rachel, the phone call with Nathan's friends listening. Andre laughed so hard he had to sit down. He said it was the most justified revenge he'd ever heard. Then he got serious. Asked if I was okay staying in that marriage. I didn't have an answer. We had patients waiting, so I went to my first appointment. Worked through lunch doing paperwork. Around 3, my phone rang. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. It was Nathan's mother. She said Liv had told her what happened and she wanted to know my side before judging. I almost dropped the phone. Nathan's mother had never called me directly in all our years of marriage. Everything always went through Nathan. I expected her to defend him, to tell me I was wrong for airing our problems to his friends. Instead, she just listened. I told her about Mom's cancer, about being her caretaker for 8 months, about begging Nathan to cancel his fishing trip, about burying my mother alone while he was on a boat somewhere, about 3 years of him acting like it didn't matter, about the cooking demands and the entitled attitude. She was quiet for a long time after I finished. Then she said she was disappointed in her son, that she raised him better than that she was sorry for what I'd been through. We talked for almost an hour. She told me stories about her own mother's death and how Nathan's father had been there every single day, how she couldn't imagine going through that alone. When we hung up, I sat in my office staring at the wall. That weekend, I opened my laptop and actually looked at our finances for the first time in years. I knew I paid for most things, but I'd never added it all up. The mortgage payment came from my account, both car payments, insurance for both cars, health insurance, groceries, utilities, gas, even Nathan's golf club membership that cost $300 a month. I went back through a year of statements. Nathan's paychecks went into our joint account and then disappeared within days, sometimes hours, charges at sporting goods stores, bar tabs, golf equipment, fishing gear, restaurant meals when I wasn't around. His entire lifestyle ran on my income while his money funded his hobbies. I made a spreadsheet. Over the past year, I'd covered about 90% of our household expenses. Nathan had contributed maybe $3,000 total to shared costs. The rest of his $35,000 salary had gone to things only he enjoyed. I saved the spreadsheet and closed my laptop. Felt sick. Rachel came over Sunday night with 2 bottles of wine. We sat on my back patio even though it was cold. She asked the question I'd been avoiding for 3 years. Why was I still here? I tried to come up with a good answer. Said something about inertia. About not wanting to admit my marriage failed. About it being easier to just keep going than to blow everything up. Rachel looked at me like I was crazy. She said those were terrible reasons to stay married to someone who left me alone at my mother's funeral, who treated me like a maid, who contributed almost nothing but expected everything. I knew she was right. The words sounded hollow even as I said them. We drank both bottles of wine and she slept in the guest room. Nathan didn't come home that night, or the next. I didn't ask where he was. 2 weeks after the kitchen incident, Nathan came home with flowers. Grocery store flowers in cheap plastic wrap, but still. He said we needed to talk. We sat in the living room. He said he should have been there for the funeral. That he was sorry he hurt me. For a moment, I felt something. Hope, maybe. Like we might actually fix this. Then he kept talking. Said I needed to forgive him and move on. That holding on to anger wasn't healthy. That we couldn't move forward if I kept punishing him for one mistake. I realized he still didn't understand. He thought this was about me being unforgiving. About me holding a grudge. Not about him fundamentally failing to show up when I needed him most. Not about 3 years of him acting like his comfort mattered more than my grief. I told him I wasn't punishing him. I was protecting myself from someone who couldn't be counted on. He left the flowers on the coffee table and went back to wherever he'd been staying. I spent the next few days organizing tax documents for our accountant. Found a credit card statement I'd never seen before. It was in both our names, but the address was Nathan's work email. I logged into the account online using our usual password. $8,000 in charges, all from the past year. Fishing equipment, bar tabs. A weekend trip to Vegas I knew nothing about. Restaurant charges on days he told me he was working late. My name was on the account as a joint holder, but I'd never seen a single statement. Never authorized the card. Never even knew it existed. I printed every statement and put them in a folder. Didn't say anything to Nathan, just added it to my mental list of reasons this marriage was over. The hospital system 2 hours away called on a Wednesday. They wanted me to consult on their sports medicine program 3 days a week for 6 months. The money was significant, almost as much as I made from my practice. But it would mean being gone Monday through Wednesday every week, staying in a hotel, being away from home regularly. I told them I needed to think about it. That night, Nathan came home. Actually stayed for dinner. I told him about the offer. He didn't even let me finish explaining before he said I couldn't take it, that he needed me home, that 6 months was too long, that we were trying to work on our marriage and I couldn't do that from 2 hours away. I looked at him across the table. This man who contributed almost nothing financially, who had just racked up $8,000 in secret credit card debt, who left me alone at my mother's funeral, and he thought he got to make decisions about my career. I told him I was taking the contract. He could deal with it or not. His choice. Friday night, Nathan had his remaining friends over. I stayed in my office with the door closed. Around 9, I went to the kitchen for water. Heard Nathan on the phone in the living room. His voice was desperate, begging. I stopped in the hallway and listened. He was talking to Paul, asking him to give it another chance. To come back for Friday nights. Paul's voice came through the speaker. He said he couldn't look at Nathan the same way after learning about the funeral, that his own wife said she'd divorce him if he ever pulled something like that. That some things you just don't come back from. Nathan kept trying, offered to order Paul's favorite pizza, to get better beer. Paul said it wasn't about the food. It was about character, about knowing what kind of person your friends really are. Then he hung up. Nathan sat there holding his phone. I went back to my office before he could see me. Sat at my desk listening to him make excuses to his other friends about why Paul wasn't coming anymore. Rachel texted me the name of her divorce attorney on Monday morning. Kieran Roberts. She said he was good at what he did and wouldn't waste my time. I saved the number in my phone and stared at it for 10 minutes before calling. His receptionist answered and I asked about a consultation. She had an opening Thursday at 2. I took it. The rest of Monday dragged. Nathan stayed at work late, which meant he was probably at a bar somewhere. I didn't care enough to ask. Tuesday he came home and acted like nothing had happened. Made himself dinner from whatever takeout he could find and fell asleep on the couch. Wednesday morning I woke up and realized I felt nothing when I looked at him. No anger, no hurt, just emptiness. Thursday afternoon I left work early and drove to Kieran's office downtown. The building was nice, professional. His receptionist led me to a conference room with big windows overlooking the city. Kieran came in a few minutes later. Mid-40s, gray at the temples, suit that looked expensive but not flashy. He shook my hand and sat down across from me with a legal pad. I told him everything. The funeral, the 3 years since, the Friday dinners, the kitchen removal, the credit card I never knew about. He took notes and didn't interrupt. When I finished, he looked up and asked about our finances. I pulled out the folder I'd prepared. Bank statements, tax returns, property deeds, credit card statements for both the joint cards and the secret one. He went through everything carefully. After 20 minutes, he set down his pen and looked at me. The divorce itself would be straightforward, he said. I owned the business, the building it operated from, and our house. I paid for everything. Nathan contributed almost nothing financially. But then came the part that made my stomach turn. Nathan could claim spousal support. Given the income difference, a judge might award it. I asked how much. Kieran did some quick math on his legal pad. Potentially $2,000 to $3,000 a month for several years. Maybe longer depending on how the judge viewed our marriage length. I sat there processing that. I'd spent 3 years paying for everything while Nathan bought golf clubs and fishing gear. Now I might have to keep paying him after we divorced. Kieran must have seen my face because he added that we could fight it. Show the credit card debt. Show his spending patterns. Show that he was capable of working but chose low-paying jobs. But there were no guarantees. I thanked him and left. Drove back to my practice and sat in my car in the parking lot. The idea of paying Nathan to not be married to him anymore felt like one more way he'd found to avoid consequences. But I couldn't stay in this marriage just to avoid writing him checks. I went inside and worked until 8. When I got home, Nathan's truck was in the driveway. I grabbed my purse and headed for the door. That's when I saw him standing in the kitchen. He was holding something. My stomach dropped when I realized what it was. Kieran's business card. It must have fallen out of my purse. Nathan's face was red and blotchy. His hands were shaking. He asked me if I was really going to do this. If I was actually going to leave him. I didn't answer right away. Just stood there looking at him holding that card like it was evidence of some crime. Then he started crying. Real crying, not just tears. His whole body shook with it. He said he'd change. He'd get a better job. He'd help around the house. He'd do anything I wanted. Just please don't leave. He kept saying it over and over. Please don't leave. I'll change. I promise I'll change. I watched him fall apart and felt nothing. No sympathy, no second thoughts. Just tired. So incredibly tired. This wasn't about him changing now. This was about him panicking because his comfortable setup was ending. He wasn't crying because he loved me. He was crying because he was losing his free ride. I told him I needed to think. He grabbed my arm and begged me to talk to him, to work this out. I pulled away and went to the guest room, locked the door, sat on the bed and listened to him pace in the hallway for an hour before he finally went away. Friday morning I left for work before he woke up. My phone rang around 10. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. It was Liv, Nathan's sister. My whole body tensed. I expected her to yell at me, to tell me I was being cruel to her brother, to defend him. Instead, she said her mother had told her about our conversation, about the funeral, about everything. She wanted me to know something. She'd always thought Nathan treated me like a maid instead of a partner. She'd watched him for years expecting me to handle everything while he did whatever he wanted. She wasn't surprised I was done. Then she offered to talk to him, to tell him he needed to grow up and take responsibility, that maybe hearing it from family would get through to him. I didn't know what to say. I'd been so sure his family would close ranks, would blame me for giving up on him. But here was his sister offering to help me. I thanked her and hung up. Spent the rest of the day seeing patients and trying not to think about Nathan sobbing in our kitchen. That weekend, Nathan went into overdrive. Saturday morning, I woke up to the smell of bacon. Went downstairs and found him cooking breakfast. Pancakes, eggs, bacon, fresh coffee. He'd set the table with actual plates instead of eating over the sink like usual. He smiled at me like this was normal, like he cooked breakfast every Saturday. I ate because I was hungry, not because I was impressed. Sunday, he cleaned the entire house. Vacuumed, dusted, scrubbed the bathrooms, did laundry. Monday, he cooked dinner. Tuesday, he cooked again. By Wednesday, I realized what was happening. This wasn't change. This was performance. He was doing these things because he was scared. Because he wanted to prove he could be different. But it wasn't real. He wasn't cooking because he wanted to be a better partner. He was cooking to keep his lifestyle. He wasn't cleaning because he cared about our home. He was cleaning to avoid paying his own rent somewhere. I watched him move through the house that week like an actor playing a role. Saw him check to make sure I noticed when he loaded the dishwasher. Saw him wait for praise when he folded laundry. Everything he did was for show, to convince me he'd changed. But people don't change in a week. Not really. Not in ways that matter. Thursday, he told me he'd applied for management positions at 3 different sporting goods stores. Asked if I wanted to see the applications. I said no. Friday, he tried to talk about us. About our future. About how we could make this work. I told him I needed more time. The truth was I'd already made my decision. I just wasn't ready to say it out loud yet. I found the apartment 3 weeks after filing. 3rd floor corner unit in a brick building 4 blocks from my practice. Floor-to-ceiling windows in the living room that let in morning light. A kitchen with white counters and enough cabinet space for all the equipment I'd taken from the house. The landlord showed me around while I calculated how much of my first paycheck after the separation would cover the deposit. I signed the lease that afternoon. Moving day was a Saturday. Rachel showed up at 8 in the morning with coffee and her car packed with cleaning supplies. We scrubbed the empty apartment together, her making jokes about finally having a place to crash when her roommate's boyfriend stayed over too many nights in a row. By noon, the moving truck arrived with my furniture and boxes. The movers carried everything upstairs while I directed traffic, telling them where to put the couch, the bed frame, the dresser I'd bought from a furniture store the week before. They left by 2, and Rachel and I started unpacking. She helped me arrange pots and pans in the kitchen cabinets, commenting on how I finally had space to organize things properly. We hung my mother's framed photos in the hallway, set up my bedroom with new sheets I'd ordered online. By 6, we were both exhausted and hungry. Rachel pulled out her phone and found a Thai place that delivered. We sat on my new couch eating pad Thai straight from the containers, and I looked around at my apartment with its empty walls and half-unpacked boxes, and felt something I hadn't felt in years. Peace. Just quiet. Simple peace. No tension waiting for me in another room. No resentment building in my chest every time I walked through the door. Just my space, arranged how I wanted it, filled with things I chose. Rachel noticed me crying before I did. She set down her food and hugged me while I sobbed into her shoulder, releasing something I'd been holding since my mother died. The divorce papers came through on a Tuesday. My lawyer called to say everything was finalized and I could pick up the documents whenever I was ready. Nathan texted me that same afternoon asking if we could meet. Just to talk. One last time before it was officially over. I almost said no, almost told him there was nothing left to discuss. But something made me agree. We met at a coffee shop downtown the following Saturday morning. Neutral territory. I got there first and ordered a black coffee, sitting at a table by the window. Nathan walked in 10 minutes later looking different somehow. Thinner, maybe, or just tired. He ordered his own coffee and sat down across from me. For a minute, neither of us said anything. Then he started talking. Told me he'd started seeing a therapist twice a week, that he got promoted to assistant manager at the new store and was making a bit more money now, that he was trying to understand why he'd acted the way he did for so many years. He said he hoped someday I could forgive him, even though he knew we were over, that he understood why I left and didn't blame me. I listened without interrupting. When he finished, I told him I hoped he became the person he was trying to be now, that I genuinely wanted him to be happy, just not with me. We sat there for a few more minutes drinking our coffee. Then we stood up, said goodbye without hugging, and walked out to our separate cars. No anger, no bitterness. Just two people who used to be married acknowledging it was done. The hospital contract came through in March, 6 months after I'd removed my kitchen items from the house. The director of sports medicine called me personally to offer the position. 3 days a week consulting on their rehabilitation program. More money than I'd made in my best year at the practice. I accepted immediately. That same week, I hired 2 more therapists to handle my regular patient load so I could focus on the consulting work. Andre insisted on throwing me a celebration party at the practice. He ordered pizza and cake, invited all the staff and several of our regular patients who'd become friends over the years. Rachel showed up with a bottle of champagne. Robert brought flowers. I stood in my office break room surrounded by people who respected my work and supported me through everything, and realized I'd built something real. Not just a business, a whole life. One that existed independent of Nathan and the marriage and all those years I'd spent trying to make something work that was broken from the moment he chose fishing over my grief. I'm chopping vegetables for stir-fry when my phone buzzes on the counter. Rachel asking how I'm doing, if I want to grab brunch tomorrow. I text back that I'm good and yes to brunch. Set the phone down and go back to cooking. The kitchen smells like garlic and ginger. My favorite pan heats on the stove. Music plays from my speaker in the living room. I realize I'm happy. Actually genuinely happy for the first time since before my mother got sick. The grief is still there. Probably always will be. Some mornings I wake up and remember she's gone and the loss hits me fresh. But I'm building a life that honors who I am instead of shrinking myself for someone who couldn't show up when it mattered most. I add the vegetables to the pan and watch them sizzle. Think about my consultation work starting next week. About the apartment lease I just renewed for another year. About Rachel and Andre and all the people who stood by me while I figured out how to leave. The stir-fry finishes cooking and I plate it, carrying it to my couch where I eat while watching a show I actually want to watch. No one to complain about my choices. No one expecting me to serve them. Just me in my space, living my life, finally free.